So sorry for the technical difficulties that could have been remedied by me being there in person. Unfortunately, I had a conflict because I'm at the FDA today, but I still wanted to take the time to follow Nancy and Thomas's invitation to talk to you all about artificial intelligence. And the way I would like to talk a little bit about it today is to give you an overview of what it is, hopefully in a way that is understandable. And later on, give you a few examples on why I think that you should care about what we currently do with artificial intelligence and what possible challenges are that might arise in the future. So one way how people can familiarize themselves with new concepts is to just put the word into Google and see what comes out of it. And I did that for you. And I Googled images for artificial intelligence. When you do that, you will find something like this, a brain that lights up. Or you might find something like this, a hand with some network in the back. Or something like this, a robot interacting with complicated equations and physical symbols. Really, what I believe is that this is not helpful for us to understand what artificial intelligence is. But because the concept is very complicated, it's laden. So let's first start off with a definition of what we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence. One definition that I believe is useful is the one that is here on the slide, where artificial intelligence is defined as the ability of a digital computer, or say a computer-controlled robot, to perform tasks that are commonly associated with intelligent beings. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, in other words, really what this means is that some computer system can pretend to act intelligently. It somehow solves problems that otherwise only intelligent beings would be solving. What type of tasks can that be? There is a multitude of tasks that can come to mind. One of these tasks, for example, is visual perception. So taking a look at the world around us and extracting from that world, from that view onto the world, important information that is useful for specific things. Like, for example, are there cars around me? Are there persons in my immediate vicinity? And so on. There might be other tasks, for example, speech recognition, that also is a task that is usually attributed to intelligent beings, which essentially means, well, can a computer understand words that are being spoken in a specific context? Now, you might have seen in your own home or in the home of family members these devices like the Alexa or the Google Home or the Echo that essentially understand speech. You can interact with them through voice. And this is again, speech recognition, a task that is usually associated with intelligent beings. There's language processing, for example, the ability to take language that we speak and translate it into a different language. And there are other tasks that I have generally summarized as decision-making, which really just talks to all sorts of processes and problem-solving tasks that we encounter in daily life. For example, should I buy item X or should I rather buy item Y? Should I watch show X or should I be watching TV show Y? And there are many more of these examples that we can think about when we think about tasks that are usually associated with intelligent beings. Now we have understood, or we have a better understanding of what we may mean when we talk about artificial intelligence. When we think about artificial intelligence and how it affects our daily life, it is also interesting to think a little bit about how we might achieve artificially intelligent behavior. And in order to understand how we might achieve this, we need to think a little bit about how a computer actually reaches decisions, because artificial intelligence, again, describes the ability of a computer to act intelligently. The way how we usually think about this in terms of a computer is in a mathematical sense. So we have something, an input, let's call it variable 1, variable x, and we have an output, which is, for example, the decision that we want to reach, variable y. When we talk about computer programs and how computers reach decisions, the way that we think about this is mathematical as a function, where y depends in some way on x. Right? Some mathematical association can be complicated. Most of the time it is complicated, but we can write this down as an association. So y in some way depends on x. For example, if we're talking about which TV show should I be watching tonight, decision-making example, then y would be the TV show that is recommended to me, and x might be the time of the day, or it might be the mood that I am in, or it might be all of the videos and TV shows that I have watched in the past week, because that tells me something about which TV shows I tend to like. Then there is this functional mapping, and once I see X, what I have watched in the past week, what time of the day it is, I can infer Y, which TV show to recommend. Now, when we are thinking about this, we want to distinguish generally two cases on how we can write down this function. The first case is an easy one. It's a case where we know the function that maps our inputs to our outputs. And when that is the case, the only thing we need to do is we need to write it down in code so that the computer can understand the instructions. There is a second case, and that second case is considerably more difficult. And that is the case where we do not really understand how we go to the output if we have the input. This is a very complicated case. I will briefly talk about that later. But let's first talk about this first case where we do understand something about the problem that we have at hand. So let's consider this problem over here, where we are given a set of animals, and we know something about our animals. We know about the animals, their color, and we also know about the animals, their height. And so you see here, right, we have tigers, we have giraffes, we have a monkey, and we have an elephant. Of all of these, we know the color and we know the height. What we want to be able to say is, given the color and given the height, I want to understand what animal it is. All right, so now what I need to do, I need to write down this function f of x that will tell me what animal it is. Again, this is a scenario where we understand something about this problem, so we can write down this function in code. And that can look something like this. So we start with a rather simple setup. Okay, we make a first decision. We take in our animal description and we decide, is the color yellow? Yes or no? If the color is yellow, then we go into the left tree over here where yellow has been evaluated as true. If the color is not yellow, we go into the other branch. And depending on how we have answered this question, we will ask a second question. We ask, well, how tall is my animal? If it's very tall, if the height is 10 feet, then it's a giraffe. If the height is not 10 feet and the animal is yellow, then it's a tiger. The same thing in the other branch. If the height is less than 10 feet and the animal is not yellow, then it's a monkey. If the height is not smaller than 10 feet, so greater than 10 feet, and the animal is not yellow, well, then it is an elephant. So with this, just knowing something about this problem and being able to think about the problem and writing it down explicitly, we have now built what we call a classifier that allows us to take in some representation, the height and the color, and make a determination of what animal we are dealing with. right? We just wrote down a function as a tree, decision tree. And if you were to give a system, a computer, just the height and the color of an animal, and the computer will tell you, well, given what you have told me, this is a tiger or this is a giraffe, that the computer system would emulate a human intelligent decision-making process, and you would perceive the system as intelligent, artificially intelligent. Now, there is this caveat that the example that I gave you earlier, where we are able to write down this function, it's not generally the case, unfortunately, because most of the problems that we encounter in real life are too difficult to write them down explicitly. In many cases, like, for example, the situation that I'm giving you here, we don't actually want to understand what animal it is from, say, the height and the color, but we might have something much more complicated than that. For example, the genetic sequence of the animal. And from that genetic sequence that we have a hard time even reading, we would like to understand which animal is it. In this case, we really cannot write down analytically this function that we are after to mimic intelligent behavior. In that cases, though, we have developed tools that allow us to approximate this function. So we cannot write it down explicitly, we cannot know exactly what it is, but given sufficiently many observations that we call experience, we can approximate this function. The way that this works essentially is we have lots of examples of genetic sequence with a corresponding label. So genetic sequence, giraffe, genetic sequence, elephant, genetic sequence, monkey, genetic sequence, giraffe, genetic sequence, and so on. Many of these sequences. And by simply going in and trying to find a function that explains this mapping from the genetic sequence to its corresponding animal label, allows us to find an approximation of this function that later we can use to emulate this behavior. So we will emulate the behavior that we have observed in all of this data that we have collected. This process of trying to find rules for decision-making from experience, from observations, is what we call machine learning. And it's a part of artificial intelligence and allows us to develop artificially intelligent behavior policies or rules from experience that we can then use to mimic that behavior in the real world. Okay. The capabilities of doing this, discover rules for complicated behavior for arbitrarily complicated problems, is really why right now artificial intelligence is on everybody's mind, right? Because we have figured out how to do this for incredibly complicated problems. Now, let me show you some of these complicated problems that are emerging in the aging space and why we might be excited and should be excited about some of the work that is coming up. One thing that we are seeing is the emergence of wearable technologies, like, for example, smartphones or smart watches, or potentially even smart rings and glasses that allow us to collect large amounts of data on, for example, our heart rate, our activity levels, and other things that are relevant for our health, and interpret this data using such artificial intelligence algorithms to detect, for example, the onset of disease or other things that are relevant for our health. There are other opportunities, for example, like sensors in a smart home environment that can monitor some of our behavior and understand whether, we're potentially getting sick, we're not moving as much as we have been moving before, or otherwise. There are opportunities for self-driving cars, which essentially potentially allow us to increase the mobility of people by keeping us, allowing us to go places, even if we can no longer drive ourselves. There is a whole plethora of robots and robotic systems that you can see here on the bottom right that will become more pervasive, that will make it into our homes to navigate the environment, help us clean up, help us keep our environment clean, or help us perform tasks of day-to-day life. And then there is a big suite of just algorithms that help us detect disease earlier from clinical data, help us make decisions, recommend specific actions, and overall help us just potentially reach better decisions. There are, however, there are specific examples. Here, for example, this is an example for a smart home where we equip rooms in the home environment with cameras that can monitor people in their environment and detect when they have fallen down and potentially need help. This helps us alert caregivers or family members earlier to make sure that people can receive the help that they need, even if they are not able to reach a phone to make a call, for example. There are other opportunities over here to essentially assess disease progression at home. So instead of having to go to the doctor every other week or every couple of weeks to monitor disease progression, we can have smart sensors here based on radar that are in the home and essentially monitor how we are progressing with respect to disease. It can be, for example, related to Parkinson's disease and the progression of the disease. It can be related to rehabilitation after joint replacement surgery or other use cases without having to go to the doctor's office, just by living at home in your usual environment. There are other incredibly exciting techniques like this one, a wearable device that is capable of understanding and parsing the speech of people and giving you real life closed captions everywhere you go, displayed on the smart badge worn by people that you interact with. So all of these are exciting opportunities and possibilities for artificial intelligence to make a tangible difference to the quality of life that we have, especially when aging. There are a couple of other reasons, not as exciting, but equally important, why you should care about artificial intelligence. And those are perils that this technology might bring about. One possibility where we should understand that artificial intelligence is manipulating our environment is, for example, in social media. You might have noticed that you and your family and friends, when you go to social media like Facebook, you are not seeing the same content. And that's not because you have different friends. That's because the algorithms, AI algorithms behind the social media platform understand something about what you care about, which content you interact with, what news you are likely to read, and what news you are likely to ignore. And because social media platforms derive their value from you being engaged and spending time on it, they send you the content that they believe you are most likely to interact with, to engage with, and to spend time for on the platform. This is something that you should understand because it's a way of, selecting for you the material, the news, the information that you consume without you actively noticing it. See this image of this, well, I believe, good-looking person? This person does not exist. It's an image that has been generated with one of the recent generative models that is capable of taking a text description, like a girl at summer with a summer hat and curly hair, somewhere on a market, and translate that prompt into an image, which is the one that you see here on the slide. This capability of current AI models is incredible. It's incredible for creativity. It's incredible for generation of art and assets. It's incredible for many reasons. It is also concerning because it gives us the possibility to create images that can fool us because we cannot detect that they are digital and synthetic, but they can communicate messages that we might not be able to understand as fake. Similar to models, the one that I have just talked about for image generation, there are models that are capable of producing text, understanding text, and responding. Here, for example, is an example of a model that has been asked for a recipe for hamburgers. And the model essentially answers and says, well, there are many different burger recipes out there, and the best one will depend on personal preference. And then it essentially gives you a recipe for a hamburger. Now, again, these models are incredibly exciting. The capabilities that these models have are really outstanding. We can interact with them. They can give us information that can be valuable to us. But really, they are mimicking human behavior so well that it will be difficult for us to tell if we are talking to a real person or if we are talking to a large language model that is capable of responding in sensical ways. Now, think about contacting customer support, and the real person that you're talking to is actually a language model that doesn't really understand you. Another issue that we should be aware is we are able of synthesizing speech at a level that right now is unrecognizable to us, is in fact synthetic. You might know Anthony Bourdain. He was a very famous chef traveling the world and investigating restaurants and culture in different places. They did a biography posthumously. So Anthony Bourdain deceased, and they released a film about his life, a biography in just a couple years ago, which is called Roadrunner. And in case you didn't know, Anthony Bourdain, even though he was already deceased at the time that the film was released, narrated the whole movie. How was that possible? Well, they built an AI model that synthesized his speech and allowed him to, given a text prompt, narrate the own movie, even though he was no longer alive. Again, the capabilities here are really extravagant, but it takes the opportunity for scams and phishing scams to the next level. So we really need to be aware of these capabilities when we navigate the real world in the future. And this is essentially where our role comes in, the AITC Technology Identification and Teaching Core, which essentially is represented by Alicia Arbache, who is a geriatrician, and myself, Mathias Unberath, a computer scientist, both at Johns Hopkins University, where we are interested in performing technology identification. So understand what technology is needed and what technology is ripe. How ready is technology for innovating and benefiting in the healthy aging space? And where are gaps and opportunities that we should really be filling? And once we have understood all of these things, we would like to understand users' knowledge. So both of people who would use the technology and their caregivers. We want to identify the questions that you have about this technology or concerns that you might be having about its use, to identify educational needs so that we can deliver and develop material that addresses the questions that you have and makes you more comfortable in navigating the AI and technology space in the future. With this, I would like to thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak to you. If you have questions, I will do my best to answer them right now. And if not, feel free to also reach out over email at matthias@jhu.edu. Thank you so much.